Hi, everybody, and welcome to our research series on sensory health. My name is Dr. Catherine Cavaliere, and I'm joined by Professor John Damiao. We are the research instructors at Dominican College, and we're here today with three OT research students, Margaret Brown, Renee Tesser, and Timothy Riley. And we're here today to talk about their part in this, in a larger narrative review that was conducted over the past year at Dominican College that talks about the sensory processing in different areas of life, such as resilience, addictions, criminal behaviors, and what we're here to talk about today, stress. So welcome, Maggie, Renee, and Tim. And let's start off by having you tell us, one of you tell us, what was your study about?
So specifically, our broad category was stress and sensory processing. And so kind of looking at that topic, we really kind of wanted to narrow in on some key terms and some definitions. And so we looked at stress and really distress and what that looks like across the lifespan. So we specifically broadened it a little bit to colic because it was harder to define in infants and much easier to define in the adult. And then we looked at sensory processing patterns, and specifically we used Dunn model. For stress, we used the transactional model, and Tim discovered that, and it really helped guide us and put parameters on what we wanted to look at.
So Renee, you're saying that you looked at the relationship between sensory processing and stress across the lifespan, meaning in infants, in children, in adults, and in older people?
Yeah, we didn't want to narrow it down just specifically to target one area, because initially when we looked at that topic, we didn't know what we would discover. And so we wanted to make sure that we looked at all aspects and all facets and the interplay between. And it would look very different in an infant than it would an adult who has more of that cognitive ability to rationalize. And so we really didn't want to narrow it down from the beginning and let the research guide us to where we could kind of explore.
So I'm hearing that because stress, you say, may look different across the lifespan, your search was probably pretty broad at first and encompassed, I would imagine, lots of different terms. Can you tell us a little bit about your search process and any challenges that you may have faced in that?
Right, so like you just mentioned, we started off with stress and sensory processing, which are two massive terms, massive fields. And I feel like that initially was a challenge of ours, is we couldn't find something that definitively mentioned stress and sensory processing because it's so broad. So we moved on, we narrowed it down to, we included search of anxiety as a kind of term for stress. We included colic, like Renee had mentioned earlier. And then we also broadened our search to include physiological stress. And yeah.
I think that going back to some of the challenges that we came across, I think that we never really found stress as being positive stress. I think that that was something that we talked a lot about how stress could be positive. We didn't find any extensive research or really any research that spoke to that.
So that sort of leads me into another question regarding this topic is, did you find, well, first tell us what you found, and then I'll get a little bit more detailed in my questioning, but what did you find in the search?
Well, I think at first it was a little confusing, as most research is, right? It led us in a lot of different directions because there were physical manifestations of stress, there was the mental piece, and then how that was displayed throughout the lifespan became a little bit of an issue. So at first, when we started finding articles, we kind of broadly categorized them into a lot of different categories. As we know, PTSD is a manifestation of stress. Did we want to head in that direction, or did we kind of want to look more in the interplay and how that affected how people interacted with the world? So I think that's really, I have to give a lot of credit to Tim, because Tim came across a few articles, specifically one in 2016 by Meredith and Strong and Rappel, I believe. And it was a research study done on healthy adults and sensory patterns and distress. And that really kind of became an aha moment and an aha article for us. And again, I give a lot of credit to Tim, because he really started to make those connections. And Tim, I don't know if you want to speak to that and how you kind of led us, how we could better organize a lot of our discoveries.
Right. So like Renee said, at first it was overwhelming, but as our research continued, we definitively started seeing a pattern based on passive versus active self-regulation. So our research kind of showed us that individuals who utilize passive self-regulation strategies, so the sensory sensitive individual, according to Dunn's model, experience higher levels of stress across the lifespan. And a few articles, in particular one by Levitt Bunin, linked this high level of stress to the development of mental health issues and mental health conditions.
Can you just elaborate a little what you mean by passive and active response strategies in the context of this work?
Right, so active self-regulation refers to an individual who actively takes control of their kind of situation and works to regulate themselves using things such as exercise. We found a study that suggested gum chewing is a positive way to manage stress. And basically it's taking control of your own stress, of your situation, and doing something about it. Whereas passive self-regulation is the individual that might tend to cope just using, just kind of trying to deal with it versus actively doing something about the stress.
So Tim or Renee or Maggie, were there in your findings any specific sensory patterns? You said sensory sensitivity that was linked to this, this was linked to a passive regulation strategy. Can you just talk about what sensory patterns are linked with what types of strategies?
Sure, so according to Dunn's model, sensory seeking and sensory avoiding are linked to active self-regulation. So individuals who are sensory seeking and sensory avoiding actively self-regulate and consequentially experience lower levels of stress across the lifespan. Individuals who are sensory sensitive are passive self-regulating and consequentially experience higher levels of stress. And kind of a gap in our research was the low registration category, I guess, because all of our research tend to focus on sensory seeking or sensory sensitive. Very few, if any, even mentioned the registration category. So I would definitely say that that's an area moving forward that needs more research. And even sensory avoiding wasn't as researched as much as sensory seeking and sensory sensitive.
So what does this mean for us clinically? What can a student or a clinician watching this and listening to your findings, what can they take away with this to inform their practice?
I think that it's important, the thought of education. I think that being aware and also with our findings to, I mean, even though we did find information, I think that there's more research to be done. I think that it's important that we do that research moving forward so that we can learn more about it. And I think that knowledge is power, and I think that it will only help as future clinicians, those that individuals that we'll be treating.
To piggyback on what Maggie was saying too, I think it's really important as therapists, especially newer therapists going out into the field, and I think anyone in the field now, to look at that population that our research showed was more at risk, which is the sensory sensitive, and start at a very young age for better coping skills. Because like Tim said, that pivotal study for us showed that if you were sensory sensitive and you didn't have the best coping skills, you were more at risk for mental illness or maybe other secondary issues later in life. And I think that it's really important that if we have this knowledge, that we try to avoid that and become more proactive in teaching so that we're not reactive, which is harder to compensate for. And so again, I think it's really important that we're mindful and we look at that at-risk population, but also educating the public at whole, especially now during the time of the pandemic. I think it's really important that people understand how much their sensory input affects how their output in life and what that looks like. And so I think it's really important that we educate not only for those that are at risk, but just in general to make sure that there's a little bit more awareness so that we're not, again, being reactive, which I think is just a harder way to treat.
I think that's such a great point that we need to teach people or better prepare them to not just react to their own challenges or impulses or reactions, but to be proactively able to compensate for those differences. So tell us, what would you do next in this process if you were to continue this research? I know Tim already mentioned briefly one of the areas of patterns has not been well researched. What would you do next? How would you follow this up?
So I see now us as having this research. The way I'd like to follow up is kind of put this into practice. Now I'd like to see schools implement programs which are teaching young children active self-regulation, the importance of active regulation, and see the impact that it has on these children as we go along. I mean, we know OT is striving towards evidence-based practice, and our study initially just demonstrated a link between one of our more important topics in our field and mental health. And especially in a time now, like Renee mentioned, of a pandemic, I think mental health is as important. It's always been important, but even now, even increasingly so. So I would just like to see individuals take our research and put it into practice and investigate kind of the impact that OT can have on children and adults across the lifespan.
I agree with you, Tim. I think that is really important. And I think another area that we could focus on taking this research is actually, I think, really two important pieces to look at. In the younger of the lifespan, colic, there were some very interesting articles and very limited small studies done on infants because it is so difficult to interpret, you know, a person that can't talk for themselves. But what is that sensory pattern looking like, and how does that affect? Because as we know, colic, you know, it is just in the infant stage, but it has lasting impact. And so if maybe there's a sensory component that can be a little bit better understood, we can, again, be more proactive. And then I'd also love to take this research and I'd like to look at the elderly population. It would be really interesting to see what some of these more active coping strategies have on different age-related diseases such as Alzheimer's. And again, being more proactive than reactive. And if we give them better coping strategies, what does that look like for their long-term care and their long-term mental health, which is so important. And this study really just displayed the evidence there.
Renee and Tim, I think you bring up some really great points and really great directions for us to be thinking about going in the future. One last question I have for you is, well, my last question, I'm not sure about John, but the last question I have for you is, what did you learn about the research process? And can you share your experiences with that so that maybe any students watching, you know, could take away that experience, or any clinician who might be interested in doing some research, a narrative review, scoping review, a systematic review in order to inform practice. What did you learn about the process?
So, I mean, I've definitely learned that it is a process. You know, at first it's going to seem super overwhelming. You know, you're not sure what direction you want to go in, but eventually you do have that aha moment and you do start to see it coming together. So I would say, you know, have patience with yourself, have patience with the project, because it is going to come together. You will have that moment and it'll be worth it in the end.
I completely agree with Tim. Definitely be patient, stay focused, you know. Yeah, I think if you keep that goal in mind as to what it is that you're looking for, I think that definitely helps you hone in on that.
I think what I learned from this whole process is basically a coping skill. I think it's really important to have a supportive team. And I think, honestly, out of everything that I found, for me, that was just the aha moment. I never could have done this project without Tim or Maggie, and then both of you as mentors. I think it's important when you lack knowledge, right? The three of us are OT students. And while we have some really great ideas and maybe from different insights coming into this from different walks of life, I think that if you're ever going to take on other research, it's really important to make sure that you're checking in with someone that has knowledge in the area of the focus of your research, so that when you feel a little lost or maybe you get a little bit off track, that there's another person there to help guide you back, whether that's a teammate or a mentor, because it really is a daunting process. And I think what Tim and Maggie had to say was so true, right? To kind of keep your eye on the prize and head in the right direction, but to just reach out to that team to keep you on the right path.
Renee, I agree. I think in all aspects of life, we're better together than we are working individually and singularly. And so I appreciate that. I think you all did a fantastic job at synthesizing this information, information that was not laid out to you very, easily and simply. It was something that you had to make connections with. I love I don't know, does anybody have your diagram or your concept map up that you're able to share real quick on the screen? No. Okay, so that's okay. But I thought, the way that you put things together was really, really helped make it very clear. So kudos to you.
And I just want to add, thank you, Renee, for those words. Education at this level is, and I always say this, it's not about us professors having all the information and giving that information to you. You are the ones now doing the discovering, and we're all just working collaboratively together to all learn together and add to the body of knowledge. So you have all now added to the body of knowledge that other clinicians and even us can take away and further add to the profession and to the individuals out there who can benefit from what you have to teach. So thank you all. That was an accomplishment, and I congratulate you. And I thank you for your time.
Yes. And if you have any questions on this project, anybody listening, you can feel free to email myself, Catherine, Catherine, .Cavaliere, Cavaliere, @dc.edu, or
You can email me at john.damio@dc.edu. Thank you all for joining us for this installment of the research projects, and we'll see you next time.